The worn leather of Clara's shoes whispered secrets to the polished marble floor of Ethelgard's, secrets of 17-hour double shifts and the 3-mile walk from the subway station. At 22, she was a ghost in this gilded cathedral of cuisine, her presence required but her existence unacknowledged. Her uniform, a starched black dress, was a shroud of invisibility, designed to melt into the mahogany-paneled walls and the deep shadows cast by the crystal chandeliers. Clara moved with an economy of motion born from exhaustion. She refilled water glasses with the silent grace of a librarian, cleared plates with the precision of a surgeon, and smiled with an ache in her jaw that felt like a permanent fixture. But while her body performed the rote ballet of fine dining, her mind was a treasure chest, cataloguing the glint of metal and the fire of gemstones that adorned the wrists, necks, and earlobes of her patrons. She wasn't just a waitress, she was a student of splendor. Her true life was hidden in a dog-eared sketchbook tucked inside her locker, its pages filled with intricate drawings of clasps, settings, and bezel designs. She was an aspiring jewelry designer, and Ethelgard's, with its parade of old money and new fortunes, was her unwilling museum. She could spot a Cartier Love bracelet from across the room, differentiate a Tiffany setting from a Harry Winston, and she harbored a particular fascination for antique pieces, the ones that told stories of forgotten eras. Tonight, the story was unfolding at Table 7, a prime corner booth upholstered in blood-red velvet. The occupant was Eleanor Vance, a woman whose face was as familiar to the society pages as the stock market ticker was to Wall Street. Mrs. Vance was a relic of a bygone New York, a woman carved from generational wealth and glacial disdain. Her silver hair was sculpted into a helmet of improbable perfection, and her eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed nothing and approved of less. "Girl," she had called out earlier, her voice like the crackle of old parchment, snapping her fingers. Not miss, not excuse me. Just girl. This water is tepid. Are you trying to poach the lemon? Bring me ice. And a new lemon. This one looks exhausted. Clara had simply nodded, murmured, "Of course, Mrs. Vance," and complied. Arguing was a luxury reserved for those who didn't have to worry about next month's rent. As she replaced the water, her artist's eye was snagged by the piece of jewelry pinned to the lapel of Mrs. Vance's Chanel jacket. It was a brooch, an antique sapphire of staggering size, the blue so deep it seemed to drink the light. It was surrounded by a halo of old mine-cut diamonds, their facets chunkier, softer than modern brilliant cuts. But it was the clasp that truly captivated her. She'd only seen them in textbooks, a simple, elegant C-clasp, a design from the late Victorian era. Beautiful, but notoriously insecure. No safety catch, a relic of a time when women didn't move so fast. Clara made a mental note to sketch it later, a perfect example of historical craftsmanship. Across the dining room, at a small secluded table for one, sat Julian Croft. He was a man who seemed to be the antithesis of the Ethelgard's clientele. He wore a simple, dark grey sweater over a collared shirt, no tie, no flashy watch. He could have been an adjunct professor or a mid-level architect. But the stillness he possessed, the way his gaze absorbed everything without seeming to look, was a different kind of power. He wasn't ignoring the room, he was downloading it. He was the founder and CEO of Croft Innovations, a man who had built a technology empire from a garage in Queens, a ghost of a different sort, one who haunted the digital world and reshaped industries with a few lines of code. He had noticed the exchange between Eleanor Vance and the young waitress. He saw the flash of condescension from the older woman and the weary resignation in the girl's eyes. It was a familiar scene, a power dynamic as old as money itself. It annoyed him. But it wasn't his business. He was here to unwind, to have a quiet meal, to escape the ceaseless demands of his world. He returned his attention to the schematics on his tablet, the noise of the restaurant fading into a manageable hum. Clara continued her rounds, a silent cog in the great, grinding machine of luxury. She served Mr. Croft his steak, noting the polite but distant, "Thank you." She cleared his plate, noticing he'd barely touched it, his mind clearly a million miles away. She navigated the narrow channels between tables, her senses on high alert for a dropped napkin or an empty wine glass. The evening wore on, a symphony of clinking silver and hushed conversations. Finally, the grand finale. Mrs. Vance had finished her dessert, a deconstructed Napoleon that she'd complained was an architectural travesty. She signaled for the check with an imperious wave. Clara processed the payment, returning the leather billfold with a quiet, "Thank you, Mrs. Vance. Have a wonderful evening." Eleanor Vance gathered her things, a crocodile skin clutch that probably cost more than Clara's college tuition, and a cashmere shawl the color of cream. She stood, adjusting the Chanel jacket, her hand instinctively going to her lapel, and then the world stopped. Her perfectly manicured fingers patted the fabric, once, twice, then with frantic urgency. Her face, a mask of composed indifference moments before, crumpled into a mosaic of panic and fury. "It's gone," she whispered, the sound sharp and piercing in the relative quiet. The restaurant manager, a man named Jean-Pierre Dubois, who cultivated a French accent despite being from Ohio, materialized at her side. "Madame Vance, is everything all right?" "No, it is not all right," she shrieked, her voice suddenly loud, vulgar. "My brooch, my grandmother's sapphire, it's gone." Every head in the restaurant turned. The quiet hum of conversation died, replaced by a thick, expectant silence. Julian Croft looked up from his tablet, his brow furrowed. Eleanor Vance's eyes, wild and accusatory, scanned the room. They passed over the wealthy patrons, the bus boys, the manager, and then they landed on Clara. They narrowed into slits of pure venom. "You," she hissed, pointing a trembling, diamond-encrusted finger. "The waitress, you were the only one who got close to me. You hovered." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The air in her lungs turned to ice. "Mrs. Vance, I didn't touch anything." "Liar!" Eleanor's voice rose to a fever pitch. "I felt you brush against me when you took the check. You sticky-fingered little thief. You probably have it in your pocket right now." Mr. Dubois, his face pale with professional terror at the prospect of a scandal involving his most prominent customer, immediately turned on Clara. His practiced charm vanished, replaced by a cold, managerial fury. "Clara, what did you do?" "Nothing. I swear, Mr. Dubois, I didn't do anything," she pleaded, her voice shaking. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, judging her, convicting her. She was no longer a person. She was a suspect. The ghost had become a spectacle. "The help these days," Eleanor Vance spat, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "They come from nothing, and they think they can just take what belongs to us. I want her searched. I want the police called. I will not leave this restaurant until my heirloom is returned." Mr. Dubois grabbed Clara's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep. "We are going to my office. You will empty your pockets, your apron, your purse, everything." "You can't do that," Clara said, finding a sliver of defiance in her terror. "That's not legal. You need the police." "In this establishment, I am the law," Dubois snarled, his fake accent thickening with stress. "You will cooperate, or I will make sure you not only never work in this city again, but you will spend the night in a jail cell so foul you'll wish you'd never been born." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She was trapped, humiliated. The weight of the accusation, the collective stare of the wealthy diners, the iron grip of her manager. It was crushing her. She looked around desperately, searching for a single friendly face, a flicker of doubt in the sea of condemnation. She saw nothing but cold curiosity, except perhaps at the corner table. Julian Croft had lowered his tablet. He wasn't looking at his screen anymore. He was watching the scene unfold, his expression unreadable, his jaw set like a line of granite. He hadn't moved, he hadn't spoken. He was just watching and waiting. The manager's office was a cramped, windowless box that smelled of stale cigar smoke and lemon polish. It felt less like a part of the elegant restaurant and more like an interrogation room. Mr. Dubois shoved Clara inside, his face a mask of righteous fury. "Empty your pockets, now!" "Mr. Dubois, please, you have to listen to me," Clara begged, her voice cracking. "I would never steal anything. I've worked here for 2 years." 2 years of casing the joint, apparently, he sneered. "Mrs. Vance is one of our most important patrons. Her family has been dining here since the Coolidge administration. Do you think for 1 second I would believe a little nobody like you over her?" The apron off. With trembling hands, Clara untied the strings of her apron and handed it to him. He turned it upside down, shaking it violently. A pen, a notepad, and a few crumpled dollar bills from a meager tip fluttered to the floor. Nothing else. He frisked the pockets with a theatrical disgust, as if he expected to be slimed. "The dress pockets," he commanded. Clara turned them inside out. They were empty. A lint ball fell out. "Your bag. Where is your bag?" "It's in my locker," she whispered, the humiliation of physical sickness churning in her stomach. "Get it." He marched her through the clattering, chaotic kitchen, past the curious, pitying stares of the cooks and dishwashers. She felt like a prisoner on her way to the gallows. She fumbled with the combination on her locker, her fingers slick with nervous sweat. She pulled out her worn canvas tote bag. It held her sketchbook, her wallet, a half-eaten apple, and a textbook on gemology. Dubois snatched the bag from her. He didn't look. He dumped its entire contents onto a stainless steel prep table with a loud crash. The apple rolled off the edge. Her carefully rendered drawings scattered. He grabbed her wallet, rifling through it, pulling out the $37 she had to her name. He picked up the heavy textbook and shook it, as if a 2-ounce brooch could be hidden between its pages. "It's not here," he said, his voice laced with frustration. He looked at Clara, his eyes narrowing. "Where did you hide it? Did you pass it off to someone in the kitchen? Did you stash it in the restroom?" "I didn't take it." Clara's voice rose, a dam of composure finally breaking. "Why won't anyone believe me? She was wearing an old jacket. The fabric is thick. It probably just fell off. Did anyone even look on the floor?" "Don't you dare try to blame Mrs. Vance," Dubois hissed, stepping closer, his face inches from hers. "She is the victim here. You are the thief, and we will find it. I've already called the police. They will be much less gentle in their search." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The kitchen staff averted their eyes, pretending to be busy with pots and pans. No one would help her. No one would speak for her. In the world of Ethelgards, she was disposable. Just then, the swinging door from the dining room opened. Julian Croft stood in the doorway, his calm presence a stark contrast to the frantic energy of the kitchen. He had taken off his sweater, and in just the crisp white shirt, he somehow looked more formidable, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He held his phone in his hand. "Mr. Dubois," Julian said, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority that cut through the kitchen noise. "I believe that's enough." Dubois spun around, startled. "Sir, This is a private staff matter. Please return to your table. It stopped being a private matter when you laid hands on your employee and started conducting an illegal search, Julian replied, taking a step into the kitchen. His eyes scanned the scene. Clara's belongings strewn across the table, her tear-streaked face, the manager's belligerent posture. I've just been on the phone with my lawyer. He was quite interested to hear about your methods. He used words like assault, slander, and false imprisonment. Those tend to get expensive. Dubois paled. Now see here, this woman is a thief. She stole a priceless heirloom from Mrs. Vance. Did she? Julian's gaze shifted to Clara. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time all night. He saw not a thief, but a terrified young woman being railroaded. Did you see her take it? He asked Dubois. Well, no, but did anyone see her take it? Mrs. Vance is certain. That's not what I asked, Julian said, his voice dropping, becoming as cold and hard as the steel table. I asked for a witness, for a piece of evidence. You have turned this kitchen into a star chamber based on the hysterical accusation of one woman. You haven't searched the table. You haven't searched the floor. You haven't even thoroughly searched Mrs. Vance's own belongings. You just went straight for the easiest target. He took another step, now standing directly in front of the sputtering manager. You know, I've been coming to this restaurant for 5 years. I know the owner, Robert. I wonder what he would think about his manager manhandling the staff and alienating customers. He paused, letting the name drop like a stone. Oh, wait. I don't have to wonder. He held up his phone, which was still on an active call. Robert, you still there? Yes, he's right here. He seems to be under the impression he's the supreme authority at Ethelgard's. Dubois' jaw dropped. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, terrified mask. He looked from the phone to Julian Croft, as if seeing him for the first time. The quiet man in the sweater was not who he seemed. Now, Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. We are all going back out to that dining room. You are going to apologize to this young lady for treating her like a criminal. And then we are going to conduct a logical, civilized search, starting with table 7. The return to the dining room was a surreal procession. Julian Croft led the way, followed by a shaken Clara and a visibly trembling Mr. Dubois. The restaurant was still deathly quiet. Eleanor Vance stood by her table, her arms crossed, her expression one of impatient fury. What is the meaning of this? She demanded as they approached. Where is my brooch? Have you arrested her? No one has been arrested, Mrs. Vance, Julian said calmly, stopping a few feet from her. Because as of yet, there is no evidence of a crime. Only a missing item. This man, Dubois stammered, gesturing weakly at Julian. He interfered. I insisted on due process, Julian corrected him smoothly. He turned his attention to the table. Mrs. Vance, you said you were wearing the brooch on your lapel. You stood up, gathered your clutch and your shawl, and then you noticed it was missing. Is that correct? Yes. And she, Eleanor jabbed a finger at Clara, was right there. Julian ignored her. He looked at Clara. You were standing here? Clara nodded, still too overwhelmed to speak. And you took the billfold from the table, correct? She nodded again. So your hands were occupied. You gave her the receipt to sign, took the billfold back, and stepped away. He was reconstructing the moment, not as a drama, but as a sequence of physical events. It seems unlikely you'd have had a free hand to deftly unpin a brooch without her noticing. She's a professional, a pickpocket, Eleanor insisted. A small, choked sound escaped Clara's lips. It was half a sob, half a laugh. The absurdity of it all was starting to break through the fear. A pickpocket. Her, the girl who once chased a man for 3 blocks to return a $20 bill he'd dropped. Empowered by Julian's calm logic, a flicker of her old self returned, the observant, knowledgeable student of jewelry. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with a new feeling. Indignation. She knew something they didn't. "The clasp," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Julian turned to her. "What was that?" "The clasp on the brooch," Clara said, a little louder this time, her eyes fixed on Mrs. Vance's jacket. "It was a C-clasp, an old one, from the 1890s, maybe early 1900s. They're beautiful, but they don't have a safety lock like modern pins. The pin just rests in an open hook." Eleanor Vance stared at her. "How would you know that?" "I notice things," Clara said simply. She looked at Julian. "Those old clasps can come undone very easily, especially on a thick fabric like tweed. If you move a certain way, or if something brushes against it, the pin can slip right out." A flicker of interest crossed Julian's face. He was seeing it now. This wasn't just a random waitress. There was a depth there, a specific knowledge that didn't fit the stereotype. He was intrigued. "Brushes against it?" he repeated, his eyes moving from Clara to the table. "Like, for instance, a cashmere shawl." He walked to the booth. Draped over the back of the red velvet seat was the cream-colored shawl Eleanor had been about to put on. It was a beautiful, heavy thing with a thick, luxurious weave. "Mrs. Vance, may I?" he asked, already reaching for it. He didn't wait for an answer. He picked up the shawl carefully, holding it by the corners. He let it unfold to its full length. "It's not there." "I would have felt it," Eleanor said, though a sliver of doubt had crept into her voice. "Cashmere is soft. A brooch is heavy. It wouldn't make a sound," Julian mused, running his hands lightly over the fabric. He felt nothing. He held it up to the light, inspecting the weave. And then Clara saw it. A tiny, dark blue thread. It wasn't cream. It was caught in the fringe at the very edge of the shawl. "There," she said, pointing. "Look at the fringe." Julian followed her gaze. He brought the edge of the shawl closer. Tangled deep within the delicate tassels, almost invisible against the dark floor, was the brooch. The pin had slipped out of the C-clasp, and the whole piece had gotten caught and twisted in the fringe as Mrs. Vance had moved it from her lap to the seat beside her. The deep blue of the sapphire had been camouflaged against the dark red velvet of the booth. Julian carefully worked it free. The massive sapphire glittered under the chandelier lights, its diamonds scattering tiny rainbows across the room. He held it in his open palm. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, filled with the unspoken weight of a terrible mistake. Eleanor Vance stared at the brooch in Julian's hand as if it were a venomous snake. Her face, which had been a mask of righteous fury, collapsed. The color drained away, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed visage. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Mr. Dubois looked like he was about to faint. He swayed on his feet, his eyes wide with the dawning horror of what he had done. He had terrorized an innocent employee, created a massive scene, and allowed a valued customer to be defended by another, clearly far more powerful, customer. He was ruined. Julian Croft didn't gloat. He didn't say, "I told you so." He simply placed the brooch on the table with a soft, definitive click. He then turned his cool, analytical gaze upon Eleanor Vance. "It seems, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice level but laced with ice, "that the only person who was sticky-fingered tonight was your shawl." He let the statement hang in the air, a quiet indictment that was more damning than any shout. He then looked at Mr. Dubois. "As for you," he said, the ice in his voice turning to permafrost, "you owe this young woman an apology, a profound one. And then you owe her job back, with a guarantee that she will face no retaliation." Dubois, galvanized by a desperate survival instinct, rushed toward Clara. "Miss, I am so sorry. 1,000 apologies. A misunderstanding. A terrible, terrible misunderstanding. Of course, your job is safe. Please forgive me." His apology was a torrent of panicked words, devoid of any genuine remorse. It was the plea of a man trying to save his own skin. Clara just stared at him, numb. An apology couldn't erase the hot shame of being accused, of having her belongings dumped on a table, of being manhandled and threatened in front of her peers. Julian held up a hand, silencing the manager. "Don't apologize to her. Apologize to Robert when he calls you in the morning to collect your final paycheck." He glanced back at his phone, which was still connected. "Robert, you got all that?" "Good." He ended the call. The finality of it was brutal. Dubois' face went slack. The fight went out of him completely. He was a marionette whose strings had just been cut. Finally, Julian turned his attention back to Clara. The hardness in his expression softened slightly. "Are you all right?" She could only nod, wrapping her arms around herself. "Let's get your things," he said gently. He walked her back toward the kitchen, leaving Eleanor Vance frozen by her table, a pariah in her own kingdom, and Mr. Dubois a ghost in his own restaurant. In the kitchen, Julian helped Clara gather her scattered drawings, handling the pages with a surprising reverence. He picked up her gemology textbook. "A C-clasp," he said, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice. "You knew that just by looking at it." "It's what I want to do," she said, her voice small. "Design jewelry. I'm studying for my gemology certification online." He nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I see." He escorted her out the staff entrance into the cool night air of the city. The sounds of traffic and distant sirens were a welcome relief from the suffocating silence of the dining room. "You need a ride home?" he asked. "I have a car waiting." "No, thank you. I can take the subway," she said, her pride insisting on a small piece of independence after being so thoroughly stripped of her dignity. He didn't push. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. It was made of thick, black cardstock with minimalist silver lettering. Julian Croft, CEO, Croft Innovations. "Clara," he said, using her name for the first time. "What happened in there was wrong, on every level. No one should be treated that way." He held out the card. "I have a foundation that provides educational grants and mentorships for promising young talent in the arts and sciences. It's called the Croft Catalyst Program. I think you would be a perfect candidate." "See." The business card in her hand felt like a paradox, impossibly heavy with the weight of its promise, yet light enough to be a figment of the city's neon-drenched imagination. Clara stood on the pavement, the river of traffic a roaring, indifferent current that threatened to sweep her away. The night had not ended with a shout, as she might have imagined. It had ended in a profound, ringing silence that was now being filled by the frantic beating of her own heart. The town car had vanished, a phantom of polished black steel, leaving behind only the scent of clean leather and the impossible reality of the name etched in silver. Julian Croft. She didn't take the subway. The thought of descending into the earth, of being packed into a metal tube with the press of anonymous bodies, was suddenly unbearable. She walked. She walked the 3 miles home, her worn shoes whispering a new story to the cracked and gritty sidewalks, a story of accusation, of humiliation, and of a strange, terrifying sliver of hope. Each step was a metronome, marking the replay of the evening's events in her mind. The sneer on Eleanor Vance's face, the iron grip of Mr. Dubois, the cold curiosity in the eyes of the diners, the sudden, anchoring calm of Julian Croft's voice. It was a film loop of shame and salvation, and she couldn't find the stop button. When she finally reached her tiny apartment, the key felt clumsy in her trembling hand. Inside, the familiar space felt alien. The dog-eared sketchbook on her small table looked naive, its pages filled with the dreams of a girl who hadn't yet been called a thief in front of 100 people. She didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the sky slowly bleed from inky black to bruised purple, to the pale, anemic grey of a New York dawn, the business card sitting before her like a judge. It wasn't a magic ticket. She knew that. Men like Julian Croft, men who built empires from code and moved markets with a keystroke, did not operate on whimsy. His offer was a transaction she didn't yet understand. It was a test. And the first part of that test, she realized with a sickening lurch in her stomach, was what she would do next. Pride warred with pragmatism. The artist in her, the girl who believed in merit and hard work, recoiled from what felt like charity. But the waitress, the girl with $37 and overdue bills, knew that pride was a luxury she could not afford. For 3 days, the card remained on the table. She scoured job listings, her stomach twisting at the thought of putting on another uniform, of forcing another smile. The viral news story broke on the second day. Her phone buzzed with texts from former colleagues. One sent a link to the blogger's post. She read it, her face hot with a renewed sense of shame, even as a small, dark part of her felt a flicker of vindication at Eleanor Vance's public evisceration. But the victory felt hollow. The world seeing Eleanor as a monster didn't make Clara feel any less violated. It just made her trauma a public spectacle. On the 4th day, her landlord slid a rent reminder under her door. It was the final push. With a deep breath that felt like she was inhaling glass, she dialed the number. She rehearsed her speech, a clumsy mixture of gratitude and inquiry, expecting a corporate maze. The operator's voice was crisp. "Croft Innovations." "Hello," Clara began, her voice a dry whisper. "My name is Clara Russo. I was given this number by Mr. Croft." A pause stretched, taut and long. "Regarding?" "The Catalyst program," she managed, the words feeling foreign and presumptuous on her tongue. "One moment." The click and the hold music, a spare, minimalist electronic piece, felt like an eternity. She was ready for the polite redirection, the assistant who would take a message that would never be returned. "Clara." His voice was exactly as she remembered, calm, low, and devoid of artifice. It cut through the static of her anxiety. "I was beginning to think you'd thrown the card away." "No, Mr. Croft, Julian," he corrected gently, "and I hope you're not calling to thank me. Gratitude is a fine sentiment, but it's a poor foundation for ambition." She was taken aback. "I don't understand." "I don't run a charity, Clara. The Catalyst program isn't about rewarding victims. It's about investing in survivors. It's about identifying individuals who can metabolize adversity and turn it into fuel. What happened at Ethel Guards was a crucible. The question I have, the question the program is designed to answer, is this: did it break you, or did it forge you? The bluntness of it was like a splash of cold water. He wasn't offering a handout, he was issuing a challenge. I believe it forged me," she said, the words feeling truer as she spoke them. "Belief is a starting point, proof is the destination," he replied. "You want a spot in the program? Earn it." I don't want to see your old sketches. I don't want to see designs you made when the world was a comfortable place. I want to see what you create now. I'm sending a courier to your apartment tomorrow with a block of jeweler's wax, a set of carving tools, and a single, flawless, 5-carat sapphire, deep blue, unset. Your task is to design a piece that tells a story, the story of that night. You have 1 week. Don't show me your pain. Don't show me your anger. Show me your insight. Show me what an artist does with fire. My assistant will email you the other details for a formal application, but the design is the interview. The line went dead. Clara stood in the middle of her room, phone in hand, her mind reeling. He hadn't just opened a door, he had shoved her toward a forge and told her to build her own key, a 5-carat sapphire, a story. 1 week, a surge of something more potent than hope, purpose, coursed through her. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her gut, but now it had a counterpoint, the white-hot fire of a challenge she had no intention of losing. The first 3 days were a descent into hell. Every time she picked up a carving tool, her hand would shake. Her mind replayed the scene at the restaurant, and her initial sketches were reflections of her rage. She designed a brooch with sharp, jagged edges, the sapphire trapped in a cage of twisted metal, a prison of gold. She designed a pendant shaped like a single, stylized tear. They were technically proficient, but emotionally hollow, artifacts of victimhood. They were everything he had warned her not to create. Frustrated, she almost hurled the wax block against the wall. She was failing at the test. On the 4th night, sleepless and defeated, she stopped trying to tell the story of the people. She stopped thinking about Eleanor's venom and Dubois' cowardice. Instead, she thought about the object at the center of it all. The brooch. She remembered her first, purely academic thought upon seeing it. A C-clasp, beautiful but notoriously insecure. A flaw, a weakness in a thing of beauty. The idea struck her like lightning. The story wasn't about the drama, it was about the design flaw. It was about vulnerability masquerading as security. It was about how easily precious things could be lost, not through malice, but through simple, elegant carelessness. Her focus shifted. The rage and hurt receded, replaced by the cool, clear-eyed focus of a problem solver, an engineer of beauty. Her hand stopped shaking. For the next 72 hours, she worked in a trance, fueled by coffee and a singular, burning vision. She didn't sleep, she barely ate. She carved and scraped and polished the blue wax, her movements precise and confident. She wasn't just designing a piece of jewelry, she was designing a solution. She was correcting a historical mistake. On the 7th day, she packed the finished wax model with the reverence of a priestess handling a sacred relic. It was a pendant. The sapphire was the centerpiece, but it wasn't caged. It was held in a deceptively simple, open-ended embrace of white gold. It looked minimalist, almost vulnerable. But hidden within the architecture of the setting was her innovation. A tiny, internal, spring-loaded piston, almost invisible to the naked eye, that would slide into place once the chain was attached, locking the sapphire into its setting with a quiet, definitive click. It could only be released by applying pressure to 2 specific, disguised points simultaneously. It was a lockbox disguised as a caress. She called it the Sentinel Clasp. Her personal statement for the application was not a plea for sympathy. It was a 3-page design manifesto. She wrote about the historical evolution of jewelry clasps as a metaphor for societal change, about the tension between aesthetic grace and functional security. She wrote about her design not as a piece of jewelry, but as a piece of philosophy rendered in metal and stone. An argument that true strength isn't about building walls, but about engineering intelligent, hidden resilience. She sent the package via the return courier and submitted the application online, her hands finally still, her mind quiet for the first time in weeks. Then, she waited. The silence that followed was a new kind of torture. She ran out of money. She swallowed her pride and took a temp job washing dishes in a small cafe in Queens, the steam and the clatter of plates, a humbling, grounding reality. Every day she expected a rejection email. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived. It wasn't an email. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the Croft Innovations logo. Inside was not a rejection, but a contract. It detailed a full scholarship to the Gemological Institute of America, a monthly living stipend that made her eyes water, and a personal mentorship with Julian. Scrawled at the bottom of the formal letter, in sharp black ink, was a handwritten note. Insight. That's the word. You didn't give me a scar, you gave me a blueprint. Welcome to the program. The work starts now. 2 years later, Clara stood not in a uniform, but in a dress the color of twilight, the fabric a soft whisper against her skin. The air didn't smell of overcooked fish and lemon polish, but of champagne and expensive perfume. The GIA Alumni Showcase was the culmination of everything she had worked for. The last 2 years had been a relentless grind of study, practice, and discovery. Julian's mentorship had been demanding, Socratic. He never gave her answers, only harder questions. He pushed her to learn metallurgy, to study microengineering, to understand the brutal economics of the diamond trade. He was forging her not just into an artist, but into an innovator. Her final collection, displayed in a central glass case, was the evolution of her initial design. It was called the Sentinel Collection, a suite of 3 pieces, all featuring her patented clasp mechanism, now refined to microscopic perfection. It was the talk of the showcase. Curators and critics buzzed around the display, marveling at the fusion of elegant design and obsessive security. She was explaining the mechanics of the clasp to a buyer from a major luxury brand when she felt a familiar stillness cut through the room's chaotic energy. Julian was standing near the edge of the crowd, observing. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit, but his eyes were the same, analytical, intense. He wasn't looking at her jewelry. He was looking at her. He saw the confidence in her posture, the easy authority with which she spoke about her work. He made his way through the crowd. I was never much for champagne and small talk, he said by way of greeting, his voice a low rumble amidst the chatter. And I was never much for being called girl and having my pockets emptied, she replied, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. The memory no longer had the power to wound her. It was simply a data point in her own history. Touché, he said, a rare glimmer of a smile in his own eyes. I never told you why I was at Ethelgard's that night. I assumed you liked overpriced steak. I was there to close a painful chapter, he said, his gaze becoming distant. The first company I ever tried to build, a small data analytics firm, I started it with my best friend. We were young, naive. We took on an investor, a man from an old money family, not unlike the Vances of the world. He bled us dry, stole our IP, and then accused me of fraud to cover his tracks. I was 23. I had nothing. I was in a room, much like that one, being screamed at, called a thief. No one believed me. It almost broke me. Clara stared at him, seeing for the first time the ghost of a younger, more vulnerable man behind the billionaire's facade. I didn't intervene that night because I was a white knight, Clara, he continued, his voice quiet and intense. I intervened because I was selfish. I was intervening for the 23-year-old version of myself. I saw in you the same spark of defiance I had, and I wanted, just once, to see what would happen if someone stepped in and balanced the scales. The Catalyst program. It's my way of balancing the scales, over and over again. A profound wave of understanding washed over her. It had never been about pity. It was about recognition. He hadn't seen a waitress. He had seen a reflection. "Well," she said softly, her gratitude too deep for simple words. "For what it's worth, you didn't just balance the scales. You gave me the tools to build a new set." Before he could reply, a woman with a press badge approached them, her eyes alight with professional curiosity. Clara Russo. An incredible collection. The name, the Sentinel Clasp, is so powerful. Tell me, what is it you're protecting? Clara looked from the journalist to Julian, and then to her own reflection in the glass of the display case. She saw the ghost of the girl in the black uniform, but she was faint, a whisper in the past. The woman looking back at her was a creator, her eyes clear, her future her own. She turned back to the journalist, her voice steady and clear, imbued with a quiet power that filled the space around her. "It's not about protecting a stone from the world," she began, the truth of it crystallizing in her mind as she spoke. "It's about protecting the story the stone carries. It's a reminder that value isn't just in the object itself, but in its journey. And that the most secure foundations aren't the ones that are impenetrable, but the ones that were designed with a perfect understanding of their own breaking points." Her gaze drifted past the crowd, past the glittering lights, to the vast, dark windows that looked out onto the city. Somewhere out there, Eleanor Vance was a footnote in a forgotten scandal. But here, in this room, Clara Russo was the architect of her own beautiful, unbreakable future, and the story was only just beginning.